Don't you hate pants?
Here's Brunette. Brunette's in. Andrew Brunette shot a score. Andrew Brunette in sudden death overtime. And Minnesota is moving on.
I won't need my high school diploma anymore. I am smart. I am smart. I am smart. I am smart. S-M-R-T. I mean S-M-A-R-T.
Played here by Danny Heatley, and out they come 2-on-1. This is Niederreiter holding on to it, and he scores! Nino Niederreiter wins the series for the Minnesota Wild.
Welcome, Giles and the Goalies podcast, episode 75. Thank you. I am Giles Farrell. We are on the internets today, not at our usual haunt.
No.
At Unnamed Bar and Grill. That voice across the other side of the computer screen is Ben Remington.
Hello.
Who did show up to our usual haunt to record, I'll point out. But,
Thanks for telling everybody that.
We all kind of dropped the ball on this one.
Yeah.
So,
well, that'll happen.
I mean, yeah. Anyway, we are on the internets today because we have a guest. I figured it was time to dust off the guest after our last one, who was less than ideal. But no, we're joined today by Bob Spencer of Hashtag Hockey and the Hashtag Hockey Podcast. Is that right, Bob?
That's right.
All right. So yeah, thanks for joining us today.
Very happy to be here. If I could just jump in with one thing real quick. Unnamed Bar and Grill feels like a bad branding choice to me. I mean, just not very catchy, you know? It just doesn't seem memorable for people. So maybe that was what your confusion tonight.
We don't like to name places as we try to hold out for sponsors, but it's gone on so long. I'm getting defeated with it. So
yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to give up on the bit necessarily, but at the same time, we're probably not seeing any kind of sponsorship deal anytime soon. So
I'll put in one last ditch effort at our regular haunt and see if I can get anything out of that. But otherwise, yeah, probably a good idea to just give that up. But,
it's a good bit.
But yeah, so after our last podcast, the Wild played it 3 times in 4 days? 4 days? After they played once in 9 days, which, and gotta love the NHL scheduler. And they started with Thursday night in Pittsburgh, and as we guaranteed on this podcast last week they would lose, they did the opposite, and they pulled out a win. Yeah, how'd you guys feel about the Pittsburgh game on Thursday night?
So I was actually recording I was doing a guest spot on a different podcast, so I only saw about the first 10 minutes and then the final period, but sure liked what I saw. You know, the top line was playing really well. Stahl and Coyle. I think Nino stayed on that line for most of the game, so just happy to see him knock off a really good team.
Yeah, I saw even less of it. I was out and about, and I did catch the final. I'd say probably the final half of the third period the next day on a replay. Long enough to see that awesome Pominville empty netter, but yeah, you got to be enthused anytime they can get a win against Crosby. Like we said, they love to kiss his rings, and even though he did end up scoring a goal. It really kind of seemed like, I saw a lot of comments from people, Russo amongst them, that said that it felt like they were a little tentative and kind of playing like that early on, but they kind of turned it around and played a little less scared throughout the rest of the game and managed to pull out a victory.
So I was working during the game.
So none of us actually saw the whole game. This is an awesome, wild podcast.
I was able to watch at my desk.
Oh, okay.
But
even better.
At 8 o'clock, this is probably second intermission range. I had to leave to go do something, so I missed chunk of the third period, and included was the game-winning goal.
So between all of us, we saw the whole game.
Yeah. So coverage of this game from the three of us is on point.
Nice.
But no, to your point, anytime they match up against Pittsburgh, Crosby's good for 3 points, and I think that's what he had on Thursday night. If I'm not.
No, he had 2.
Or did he just have 2?
Yeah, they only scored 2.
2 goals. Wow, down night for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, they were able to battle back and pull out 2 points, especially coming off a long layoff, where in previous years you would have gotten a pretty lifeless effort and the excuse of, well, we hadn't played in 5 days after the game. So that was a nice thing to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a bad feeling, though, that's going to come back to bite us later in the season, where we're going to have more games and more days when maybe some of the other teams in the division have got some off days. So try not to get too hung up on the scheduling early in the season, but just kind of, how does a team go 2 weeks and play 2 games? I'm not really sure how that happens. Try not to be too pessimistic about it, but feeling like that might come back to bite them a little bit.
It just, I don't know, in the last couple of years, it always seems like they have very long stretches of no games in late October, early November, and then, they have to pay for that later on in the season. But I haven't looked that up by any means. That's just off the top of my head how I kind of remembered.
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't know, but like we mentioned before, with Parise hurt, this was maybe an opportune time to have that kind of wonky schedule. Eric in that meantime, Erik Haula got healthy and came back, so that's a good sign. We're without Scandella as well. So you're without Scandella, you're without Parise, you're without arguably 2 of your top 5-ish or 10-ish players, and probably 1-5 and 1-10. But so. Kind of not a terrible time to have a light schedule. We mentioned that before, and we're gonna rack up a couple of wins here and there during that time. That's even better. Obviously a win against Pittsburgh is huge.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Since that's about as much as we're probably gonna get out of Pittsburgh, since I think all of us combined to watch maybe the entire game.
Yeah.
I guess we can fast forward ahead to the Saturday night game where the Wild found themselves in Philadelphia. Thankfully, the Flyers weren't wearing the Pittsburgh Penguin knockoff inspired jerseys. They were just going with the regular home orange, and somehow managed to lose that one. Was that a 3-2 score, or was that 4-3? 4-3.
Yeah.
I have done no research.
I'm trying to remember. It was yesterday. I don't know.
Consecutive podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seemed like kind of I don't know, as much as the Pittsburgh game might have looked good, that Flyers game felt awfully familiar for this team this season. They didn't seem to get a whole lot of chances, and they seemed to be giving up a lot of shots. Not, certainly your prime golden shots in front of the net, but they were still giving up a lot of shots, and they were really lucky to be in that game as long as they were, because they really kind of got outplayed for a vast majority of it. So that game, is as good as the Pittsburgh game may have been, that game was very vintage 2016-17 Wild, it seemed like, and when you have games like that, and Dubnyk played a good game, but he didn't absolutely stand on his head to the tune of a 40-save shutout. So that's what happens when you rely on him to literally do all of the work for the team.
Yeah, I was a little bit worried about. Maybe I'm grasping at straws a little bit, but kind of historically, this is the type of team that Minnesota has a real tough time playing against. Guys that you're just going to come out banging bodies. I think particularly this year, the composition of this Minnesota team is more, not that we're even maybe more finesse than we have been, because that's kind of been the MO of the team for a while, but I was expecting them to get pushed around a little bit more than they did, based on how their roster is constructed this year. Maybe that's grasping at straws a little bit. I know they didn't do very well, but that was one that I was kind of more worried about, even more so than Pittsburgh a little bit, just because I like what they're doing here this year with the 4 scoring lines and kind of removing some of the players like your Ryan Carters and your Jarrett Stolz, who really aren't going to help push possession or scoring too much. But anytime they're matched up against a big strong team, like your Kings, your Flyers, I just don't feel as good about the matchups this year.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Wild definitely love to get shoved around when they play these bigger teams, and Flyers are definitely one of them, as you pointed out. And that's just a weird point to make, but Wayne Simmons is definitely a player I'd rather have on my team than play against, just because he can do just about anything.
Yeah.
I do have him on my fantasy team though, and I'm not mad about that because and it's a hits league, so I'm getting some category coverage.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Braden Chen and Wayne Simmons both on my team this year, so my fantasy team's doing well.
So I missed about the last half of this game again.
Jesus Christ, Giles.
So I kind of leave it up to you guys for thoughts on how this game ended, because
Well, it was the usual kind of like mad dash at the end. They only lost by 1 goal, so it was it was the usual pressure at the end, and Steve Mason made just a hell of a split save at the very end. Eric Stahl was kind of looking at a yawning net and just didn't elevate the puck quite enough, and bounced it right off of Steve Mason's pad as he slid across the crease. So it was one of those classic near misses for the Wild at the very end there. But at least playing as poorly, I guess you could say, as they did, kind of getting knocked around by this Philadelphia team. I guess you take a little bit of solace that it was only a 1-goal game. I mean, they definitely got outchanced by quite a bit. They definitely got outshot by quite a bit. I guess you just kind of take what you can get, and you don't get too upset.
Yeah, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the game winner was a power play goal, which has been a real surprise strength area for the Wild so far this year is a penalty kill. I don't know if that makes it any easier to take a loss, if they give up the winner on a power play, but maybe we could talk about their penalty kill a little bit, because I'm shocked. Frankly, I'm shocked that their penalty kill is doing this well because of some of the turnover over the last couple of years. Not that we've had extremely good penalty killers, but just the number of minutes that guys like I already mentioned, Brodziak a couple of years ago, Jarrett Stoll, and Ryan Carter last year. I mean, guys are playing more, like Jason Zucker is playing more penalty kill minutes this year, and the unit's really stepping up, and it's got me scratching my head because I didn't write anything about it, I didn't make any formal predictions. But I was kind of expecting the PK on this team to take a nosedive, and they really, really haven't. Maybe it's too early in the season. Dubnyk really is standing on his head on the penalty kill, so maybe that'll regress a little bit. But one area that I'm really surprised in the early going of the season is the penalty kill, just from the number of minutes that are gone, and kind of the shifting new systems, but a little bit new personnel too. So I don't know. Have you guys noticed? I mean, what have you guys been noticing for the penalty kill this year?
Well, I wrote about the effect that Boudreau could have on this team this summer, and a lot of people pointed to the Ducks having the top penalty kill and power play last season as being like that was going to be some kind of magic bullet for the Wild. And, it really doesn't jive with Boudreau's history. He doesn't have an incredible history of special teams. It just so happens that last season they had really, really good special teams for some reason.
Yeah.
But to your point, I mean, it's obviously not something measurable, but it seems like the team is playing a lot more aggressive this year. It's the same cast of characters, but it feels like there's a much more of a focus on aggression versus really structured defensive play. And that kind of goes across the board, I think, from what we've seen with Boudreau versus the Mike Yeo system. But that's the only thing that really kind of jumps out to me, is that they're a lot more aggressive, and they haven't been getting burned on it. They haven't been giving up a whole lot of chances. They're really kind of taking it to other teams and not letting them get comfortable set up in the offensive zone. And to your point, yeah, Dubnyk is absolutely standing on his head. I mean, he's absolutely just killing it right now on penalty kill save percentage, and last year he was brutal. He was a reason that people pointed to for the penalty kill being bad last year. So I guess just kind of the best penalty killer is always your goaltender, and if he's playing well, then your penalty kill is playing well, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I have the stats right in front of me here.
Sure.
Sorry. Last year, Dubnyk on short-handed had a 84.5 save percentage, and before like, I don't know, it was like 4 or 5 games ago, he was at like an insane 97% save percentage, but it's gone back down to 91.5.
Which is probably more
still,
sustainable.
Which is still really good. That's still quite good for a PK.
That's like 4th best in the league right now. Among those goalies. So that's, to me, that's the biggest reason why the penalty kill has improved, and Ben kind of talked about the penalty kill strategy from the 4 guys on the ice. So.
Yeah, and it's really hard to, if I could kind of bring the analytics perspective in, it's hard to look at. It's hard to find metrics to assess a penalty kill, because it's one of those situations where we can't really look at the shots against, or the shot rates, or even shot attempt rates, just because of the nature of the dynamic of the power play and the penalty kills. So it's kind of hard to find ways to look at measuring penalty kill other than the conversion rate overall, which usually seems too simplistic, and then the shot rates, or even the shot attempt rates, which don't really tell the full story, because a good penalty kill unit is preventing shots from even happening in the first place. So I've always had kind of difficulty looking at stats or trying to assess penalty kills other than just kind of watching them and anecdotally seeing they're playing well, they're playing not so well right now. So I've always been kind of wishing for a better way to quantify penalty kills other than just the kind of limited tools that we have.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I guess maybe look at shot attempts this year versus last year, I guess, might tell a little bit of a story. But even then, it doesn't really tell the whole story. So it is really kind of tough, because it feels like maybe the chances haven't been quite as good this year, and it felt like last year the penalty kills seemed so bad at times that other teams were getting a lot of high-danger opportunities, whereas this year maybe not quite as much. I don't know. That's something probably worth looking into, but whatever it is, it's working. And even though they did allow a power play goal in 3 of those road games, the percentage overall is still very good, and obviously their record at home is pretty incredible still as far as the penalty kill goes. So I guess we'll see how long it lasts. It'll probably go as far as Dubnyk takes it, I guess. But that's what it is there.
So I had a couple more stats that I wanted to bring in, maybe because Kemper started tonight's game. I'll mention maybe some of the other Dubnyk, and these are stats at 5-on-5. Do you guys ever get into you just mentioned high danger shots. Do you guys get into the high, medium, low danger kind of stuff too much?
A little bit, yeah. I wrote an article last week on Dubnyk and the start that he's off to, and how his high danger save percentage is 10 points higher than it was last season. And how that's not super sustainable, but at the same time it's a good sign, kind of thing. So I have messed with it a little bit. I just happened to write an article about it last week, but not something I frequent in, just something I dabble in once in a while. Yeah,
and I'm going to admit I haven't read that article, but I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to make the exact same case. I'm looking at. I actually have it at, after last night's game. I have it at 11 points higher.
Yeah.
80 historically since Dubnyk has been with the Wild. 82, 81, right around there for high danger save percentage. And this year, 925.
Yeah.
And these are like point blank. These are the goal mouth, the low slot. And so I kind of think, on one hand, I've mentioned this over on my own podcast and the Jablam hockey that I was just on. It's like any statistical conversation start at this point in the season starts and end with, well, it's a small sample size, but, and so we got to be careful about making too many generalizations or conclusions, but it just sort of feels like that's one stat to look at. I think really in particular, if you can keep that up, how much it's going to regress, how much it's going to drop from the mid or from the low 90s where it is now to the low 80s historically where it's been. I just feel like I've talked a lot, and everybody's kind of aware of the puck luck and the shooting percentages and things like that. And so you don't want to be too doom and gloom or predicting regression, but there's going to come a stretch where a few of those are going to go in, and he's just not going to look quite as good. And I think it's going to, as Dubnyk goes, the Wild are going to go. And so that's, I think, a stat I'm going to be watching pretty closely. His medium and even low danger save are pretty much right in line. His low danger actually is slightly lower than it has been.
Yeah,
medium danger right around, still elevated by a few points. But the real glaring one is that high danger save, just because 81, 82, and that's, I think, pretty typical for those types of chances. And he's sitting there at 925. So that's a stat I think I'm going to be watching closer than some of the others to take a temperature of how this team might do.
Yeah, and I tried to theorize as to why that improved so much, and there really isn't, obviously it's tough to theorize that, but he's probably worked on some things. Maybe his rebound control is a little bit better this year. I haven't really gotten a feel for that one way or another. But then it's also, I mentioned in the article, Boudreau has put a really big focus on playing physical. And I think we've seen that in front of the net maybe a little bit more this season than perhaps last season. I don't know, like you said, it's tough to quantify those things, but that could be it. I don't know. It could be it, or it could be a very slim part of it, or it could be no more than a confidence booster for him, knowing that guys are supposed to be clearing guys out in front of the net. Because I feel like Dubnyk has had a little bit of trouble with players camping out in front of him and him trying to see through screens and whatnot. So I don't know. There's a lot of different reasons why he's improved so much, or there could be, I should say, a lot of different reasons why he's improved so much on those high danger shots. But your guess is as good as mine.
Another thing I would mention, and I've only just I've got a spreadsheet up, and I've just run this real quick calculation. I don't know how much there is to it. The number per game of high danger shots against this year, and again, I have to say it's a small sample size, so we really have no idea whether this is it. But he's seeing fewer of those high danger shots against, and so maybe that plays into it a little bit where he's just better able to focus. He just seems more locked in. He just seems calmer. It's really hard to say other than he just looks more locked in than he has been at the start of previous seasons. I've also heard, I wish I had a good stat to back this up. Have you guys seen this too? If you look at his month-over-month splits, I think October historically has been a decent at best year for Dubnyk, and he's gotten better as the season gone on, or other months have been good for him. So maybe, knock on wood, maybe this strong start he'll just be able to carry it through, and if he can do whatever he does that lets him kind of do better as the season goes on. Keep that going. I don't know how much there is too, because we're looking at about 4.0, 4.1 high danger shots against over the last 2 years. This year so far, 3.6. So a small change. Whenever we've got sort of low numbers like this, it's hard to you don't want to dissect them too much. But maybe there's something to that too, that either the system or just the guys in front of him are doing a better job of keeping that puck out of that low slot, and so he's better able to stop the ones that he does see. I don't know.
Yeah, right before the season, we discussed, Dubnyk's importance early on, and I brought up that his splits throughout his career weren't overly great in October, and I said, if he's probably not going to get off to a great start again, but don't freak out. And sure enough, the opposite has happened. And now yesterday I was just sitting there wondering, where would this team be if Dubnyk had gotten off to a slower start? And that wasn't a good thought. But yeah, as you said, Bob, as the Wild will go as Dubnyk goes.
And maybe the situation that you just described is kind of what the Nashville Predators are doing right now. They had a real stumble out of the gate. Pecorine in particular had that awful, first month or so, but they're starting to turn it around quite a bit. So, that might be a good example to look at, or team that kind of went through that same thing that you just described.
Or they're just really missing Shea Weber.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it wouldn't. Yeah, I haven't watched too much Predator, so I watched as much hockey overall. So when I lived in California, I used to have the NHL TV package just so that I could watch the Wild. But obviously, the benefit was I could watch whoever I wanted, and I didn't get that now that I live in Minneapolis. So I'm pretty much only watching Wild hockey, and I do kind of miss checking in on other teams or catching a good matchup here and there. So I admit I haven't seen too much of the other teams, even in the division, but Nashville in particular. But I'm going to try to watch more. Actually put eyes on them, because you can't tell too much just by reading box scores and things. So
right.
Haven't seen as much hockey of the other teams this year as I'd like.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you for watching hockey wise. It's work has just been killing me, so I haven't gotten to see a lot of what I'd like to, and especially considering the Edmonton Oilers are somehow relevant again. So
somehow not terrible.
Yeah, it's incredible. But yeah, and then as we're recording this Sunday night after the Wild game, the Wild finished out the week with a 2-1 overtime win. That's right, overtime win against Ottawa with a Matt Dumba goal in the extra session. This was the game I actually got to see all of, and there were some ups and downs, but overall for a team on the second of back-to-backs, I was kind of impressed considering what we've seen in previous season from back-to-back efforts out of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've really seen them use that whole back-to-back thing as kind of a crutch in seasons past. But tonight, you never once would have guessed that this team, just made an international flight overnight to play the second day in a row. So it kind of surprising, and for the first time in a long time, they outshot their opponent. Well, I guess they did in Colorado, but and they actually won the game. So that's what made that different. But yeah, interesting. It was a game that we saw a lot of good sustained pressure out of them, and they let up some chances against, obviously, but it felt like they played pretty well in front of Kemper, and he really held up his end of the bargain. He had a pretty incredible night, all things considered. Especially he hadn't played in 3 weeks, and he had basically played pretty sloppy before that. So all in all, you got to be really happy with tonight. As much as yesterday was frustrating, today's game was quite the opposite. You got to be borderline ecstatic with the effort that they came through tonight, and the fact they actually won in overtime.
Yeah, and I'm just happy for Darcy Kemper. I think the team's going to need him to step up a bit, contribute more than he has in years past, just in terms of the number of starts, but also kind of his overall performance. And he's been a guy that you almost can see it, where he's got a bad game and it just starts to unravel, or even within a game, he lets in an easy one or has a bad a couple of minutes or whatever, it starts to unravel. So just great to see him keeping the team in the game, playing well, not getting too much inside his own head. I'm also just glad last few games that the team is putting 37, 38, 39, maybe into the 40s, number of shots on goal, even tonight on the second half of a back-to-back when we expect them to be kind of tired. So obviously you want to see them outshoot the opponent, but I'm just happy that they're getting pucks on net and that they're starting to maybe shift to the system a little bit and kind of break out of this too much defense first over the last couple of years, kind of really embracing Boudreau's system and again, like I mentioned, the composition of the team, and to really play that high event hockey, which the fans have been so starved for the last couple of years.
The last couple or the last 16?
the last couple of all of the years.
Yeah, the last couple entirety of this franchise.
Yeah.
Oh, I've been looking up the shot attempts here at 5-on-5. I looked up last night, and the Flyers only had one more shot attempt at even strength than the Wild did, which was kind of surprising considering how it sounded like the game ended. And then tonight in Ottawa, the Wild outshot Ottawa 49-46 at even strength. So it's kind of nice to see them starting to trend in the right direction in that department. Beginning of the year was just high PDO was carrying us to win. So. I don't know. Something else I've been thinking about here in the last couple of games is I'm kind of interested to see how you guys feel. Is Chris Stewart not overly playing well? It feels like I see him get called out at least every other game by Boudreau, and so I've looked up at least his ice time here in the last 5 games, and he's averaging 11 minutes a night.
Wow.
And his play, at least just to me, his play has just kind of left a lot to be desired. So I'm kind of curious to see how you guys feel about him.
Fun fact about Chris Stewart, he's actually in the bottom 10 of skaters in terms of Corsi percentage. I think his Corsi was about in the 45 and change. This is before today's game, certainly. What is his role on the team, and what were we kind of expecting for him? We're not looking for him to have 6 or 7 goals at this point in the league, at this point in the season. I just kind of wonder what are our expectations of him? Is kind of how we have to go about answering that question. I mean, he's been lousy. Boudreau's called him out. He really kind of is invisible most nights, and that's obviously not a good thing, but. What were we expecting for him when he came back? Is kind of to answer your question with a question. I kind of wonder what he's been objectively bad, so we can say that. But what are we expecting of him this year?
I think he was a big body that Boudreau was familiar with, and that was the interesting part of that is that he played for Boudreau last year, and then subsequently he's the one getting called out and all that kind of things. I think he's a fourth-line grinder type. I think he's only really going to have great numbers when he's on a line that's going to do well for him. I mean, we saw him have a pretty decent run, actually, with the Wild 2 seasons ago, paired up with Koivu and Nino, and he actually had he had good production stats-wise, and he actually had decent underlying numbers too. And until the playoffs, it all kind of fell apart for him. But I think he's just that. He's just it. He's a relatively inexpensive veteran. He's a depth piece, a guy you don't mind having on the fourth line. You mentioned him being in the bottom 10 last season. I'm pretty sure the entire fourth line was in the bottom 10 for most of the season. Thank you, Jarrett Stoll and Chris Porter.
Jarrett Stoll was bottom 3.
Yeah, Jarrett Stoll almost took that title home. So, I think having just him, as a possession kind of black hole, more or less, I think won't kill this team as long as you have some other players playing relatively well, and once in a while we'll see him bump up and play with some players pretty good and even score on occasion. I mean, he has tallied a couple of points this season. He's certainly not lighting it up, but that's about it for him. I think that's reasonable. I think that's fair. I don't think anybody should be counting on him to be the guy who can play second through fourth line and produce everywhere, and the guy who's going to be a lockdown defender on the fourth line either. I don't think he's any of those things. He was inexpensive big body, and as much as some people might hate it, Boudreau is still an advocate of protecting his players and all that, and Stewart is certainly that kind of guy. So he serves a limited purpose on this team, but he does serve a purpose, I guess. I mean, I guess I'd rather have him out there than a guy like Chris Porter or Jarrett Stoll, who's going to pretty much do none of those things for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Stewart started the year on the I want to say he started on the Koivu line.
Yeah, he did.
The second line, and so I just it's just that was never going to work out. I don't know why. I don't even know why that was tried. But
and maybe in defense of him here in the last 5 games, it doesn't help that he's playing with Christoph Berchi every night, and
he's playing on the Iowa Wild.
Yeah, he's playing with guys who are probably better suited to be in Iowa. So maybe once guys come back from injury and players start shuffling down the lineup, maybe his play will pick up for the better. But I don't know.
Yeah, and him starting the season on the Koivu line, I mean, I kind of get it only because we saw so much success in late 2015 with him playing with Koivu, and if he were playing well, which I don't know if he's how well he's capable of playing, but if he were playing well, having a guy who's a big body and can fight for pucks and actually has a little bit of offensive skill to go with that, that's not a bad player to have on a line with Koivu and some other guys who can produce a little bit of offense, but he's just not playing well. I mean, he's just we've seen him, making several mental mistakes out on the ice and just in general not playing well. But I think if he were playing well, he might not be half bad on a line like that. Like I said, we've seen it before. So I don't fault Boudreau for trying it, but luckily he had a quick hook because Stewart obviously didn't respond to that assignment. Yeah,
on the one hand, I hate using this argument because it's definitely a crutch argument. But on the other hand, I think it's very true that, you guys know I'm a big stats guy. But any stats person worth their salt will tell you that there are things that players do that don't show up on the stat sheet. It's a cliche, but it's it's true.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain extent, this is kind of what Stewart is, where he's a known quantity. We know what to expect from him, but even what we're expecting from him, we're not seeing. I mean, the things that he can do that aren't showing up on the stat sheet is just kind of to agitate other players, and I don't mean getting in fights, but dropping the bodies once in a while, kind of getting under their skin, being that sandpaper element, kind of facilitating, helping the other players on this team do what they're going to do. And even if that doesn't mean, laying big hits or anything, if that's just kind of taking some of those defensive zone starts to allow your Parises and your Stalls, and even your Koivu and Granlund, who have been taking a ton of defensive zone work, take some of that pressure off of them and kind of help them do what they do. It's this weird kind of thing where there are things that he does that don't show up on the stat sheet, and so from that perspective, we can't really quantify those. But even having said that, he's not really doing them. He's not really doing what he's expected to. He's kind of, I don't know if you guys would agree or disagree with this, because he's pretty much just a role player. I know he can contribute some offense, but he's not really playing the role that they need him to play, and I think that's why he's being called out, rightfully so.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I would agree as well.
So I got a question for you guys that's just been burning a hole in my head, and I think particularly it sort of came to the front today, which is this player that you guys may or may not have heard of. His name is Joel Eriksson Ek. I don't know if you're familiar. You may or may not be. He didn't play tonight, and the reason is because he's sitting on his 9-game threshold. So if he plays another game for Minnesota this year, they'll burn a year of his entry-level contract. And so they just scratched him. He's not hurt. He's not unhealthy, but he didn't play tonight, which I don't really fault them for doing. I was talking to a guy on Twitter about how I don't really necessarily fault them for taking a little bit of extra time to make that decision. I mean, what do you guys see? How do you guys predict that playing out this year? Obviously, at the start of the year, all the talk was that he was going to be playing for the pro club, or he was going to be in Sweden. And there wasn't really much of an in-between. It didn't look like the AHL was in the cards for him. So now he's got his nine games under his belt. He's had some really good puck luck, but he's also showed just an ability to have good positioning, be in the right place at the right time, really hustles, makes a lot of really good, just kind of effort plays. It feels like right now, if they send him to the AHL to try to preserve that year of his ELC, he's just going to come back up when somebody gets hurt or somebody's ineffective. So, like, what do you guys think is going to happen with this guy for the rest of this year? It's kind of a balance between do they keep him up? Do they think they can win now, or do they try to play the long game, preserve that year of his entry-level contract? Like, what are you guys thinking about it? First of all, his play this year, and also what he brings to the table, but also kind of what do you think the team should do with him? Because I'm kind of stuck. I had a certain opinion, and now I'm kind of questioning that based on what he's done the first 9 games.
Yeah, I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago after he had he kind of came out of the gate really hard, and those numbers haven't changed. He's the worst on the team in Corsi percentage right now as far as forwards go, I believe, or as far as all skaters go, I believe. And by the same token, he's tops on points per 60 minutes. So it really is kind of a weird. It doesn't really lead you in any particular direction because it looks like he's playing pretty well defensively, and that point production. There's obviously a reason for that too. He's a skilled guy. He's a talented guy, and the goals that he has scored. I mean, some of them have been, pretty legit NHL goals. I mean, I think back to that wrist shot that he fired. Where was that? At New Jersey, I believe. Where it was, that was a hell of a laser that he fired. So, I think the Wild Brass is kind of suffering the same tentative thought about him. I mean, they don't really know what to make of him either, and you certainly don't want to burn a year off that ELC. We saw the repercussions of that with Matt Dumba, where they foolishly burned a year off of him.
Exactly.
But at the same time, I mean, this kid he's a center, or he can even play wing apparently, and they could kind of use some skilled forward depth, and that was the argument that I made in the article 2 weeks ago. Was that, well, I think he's going to stick around just because forward depth is kind of a black hole for this team. It's not as foolish as Dumba because we still had good defensive depth at that time when Dumba was burned, or his year was burned, I should say. Right now, I mean, we've seen what a couple of injuries have done to the makeup of this team, and I think that's why he sticks around. But by the same token, I mean, I don't want to be too harsh, but I think he has been a little invisible in a handful of games. There's certainly been some games where he pops off the page at you. But I think other games he has been more or less invisible, which you might expect out of a 19-year-old. I mean, I think that's perfectly fair. But that kind of makes that decision a little more foggy. I ultimately think he ends up sticking around, but it's a really close call at this point, closer than it was after those first couple of games where he produced a pile of points. That's for sure, and that's why we saw this healthy scratch tonight.
Yeah, I think prior to tonight, I would say the last 3 or 4 games, I think he's been pretty invisible. I can't remember really even hearing his name called or seeing him make a really good play over the last, I want to say, about 3 or 4 games.
Right.
I think, just thinking about this, I want to say we've probably seen enough out of him from his first, 4 or 5 games to say that he's probably not going back to Sweden. So whether they just hold on to him with the big club or they just send him to the AHL. But I think, he's going to be around because, as you guys said, he just has so much skill and he can make an impact. It would just be foolish to let him go back to Sweden for the rest of the year when they could definitely use him at some point down the line.
Yeah, I mean, how much developing, obviously he's 19, so the answer is still that he's got a lot of development to be done, but how much is he going to develop in the AHL playing on an awful Iowa Wild team versus how much, of that hard-earned experience will he get in the NHL? I really don't know. I'm really wondering. I tend to almost default on the side of let the player develop more, preserve the control over the player, because 3 years down the line, we don't know. He could be anywhere. I mean, he could be potential superstar. Could be productive. Could be role player. I tend to always be more risk averse and kind of fall on the side of. I was shocked last year when they burned right through Dumba's year of his ELC. So usually I fall on the conservative side. After particularly the first 3 or 4 games, not so much the last few, I think he's earned it.
Yeah.
I think he's shown, that he's got the smarts and the anticipation and the positioning. Like, he's doing things that, your 25 and 26-year-old prospects can't do. So now I'm kind of on the other side of the fence where I'm thinking maybe just kind of let him get his 12 to 13 minutes a night at the NHL level and just get all that good experience up now. So I've swung back and forth. I think I might be leaning towards keeping him up, but I do wonder how much he can develop in the AHL, because he's played professionally in Sweden and succeeded there, and I just almost wonder if the AHL is a step back for him developmentally. But I don't know too much about the Swedish Pro League, so it's really hard because you can't get too excited based on a real small sample size, and organizationally, it really can bite you in the butt if you burn a year and then the player really does turn out to be fantastic, and then they've got to worry about his RFA, a year sooner. So it's tough. I don't envy Chuck Fletcher, but it's so hard because you have these 9 games. This is kind of what I was thinking about why they sat him today, to just take a little bit of extra time, because you have these 9 games. It's such a small sample that you can't draw too many conclusions, but you kind of have to, and so. It's tough, and I wonder how much too their decision to burn Dumba's year last year affects their decision making on Eriksson Ek, because on the one hand you don't want to overreact if they feel like maybe they made a mistake, and they don't want to overreact too much, but you also have to evaluate the players separately, and they're in totally different positions, and so there's so many more questions than answers at this point. If I was a betting man, I think I would bet that they keep him up, though, just because the things that he's shown, I think, have been enough to kind of earn the spot.
Yeah, and to that point, about them learning from Dumba, another point that I made in that article was a point to keep him would be that they're not super worried about that ELC kicking in. Chuck Fletcher has even said that much. Whether that's the truth to him or not is another story, because it's his job to worry about those kind of things. But at the same time, they do have some kind of albatross contracts falling off in those 3 years. They have Koivu, his big contract falling off. You certainly expect him to be under a smaller deal if he stays with the team at that time. Pominville's contract expires in 3 years. Eric Stahl is gone in 3 years, whether they re-sign him or whatever. So I think that just given the money that's going to fall off the table in that next 3 years, I mean, obviously you're still going to have the Parise and Suter contracts, but all the contracts signed beyond that are relatively team friendly. So I think they're kind of genuine when they're not afraid of burning a year on him. That, and again, he's a forward, and if he ends up in Iowa for a little while, probably not the worst thing. I mean, I think it's at least comparable to the Swedish Elite League. I don't know that it could be worse, but it's at least comparable, and if he gets more minutes there, maybe that's better for him right now, and then they have him as a depth piece down the line when injuries hit again, and they have half of their lineup coming from Iowa yet again.
Yeah, and I think more broadly, I mean, you mentioned albatross contracts, and you got to talk about Parise and Suter, because not even in the 3-year period that Eriksson Ek's ELC is going to come up, but just more broadly over the next 10 years or whatever it is, the team really have to be careful. They could really find themselves in a bind if they have too many more, problem contracts, or just those 2 huge contracts are going to hang over this team for a long time. Yeah. Which I think is another reason generally why I would push to be more conservative, because even beyond the next 3 years, they're going to have to contend with those huge salaries for much longer than that.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's not making or breaking this season for this team, which is important. So if they keep him, you're losing a year off of him on the back end. But again, there's a lot of reasons why that's not a huge deal. But then again, if you do send him back, if they make that decision, I don't think that that absolutely cripples his team at all. I mean, I think he's a good talent. I really liked him. I liked him when they picked him. But I don't think that come March or April we're lamenting Eriksson Ek not being on this squad. I just don't know that he's that much of a can't-miss talent.
No, I mean, I agree with you, but I also am of the mindset where, especially over the last 3, 4, 5 years, but even we could go a little bit farther beyond that. This team has not had a homegrown talent have a real massive breakout year.
Yeah.
And so the dynamic of the team just over the course of the season has kind of always been the same. And so if they keep him, and even if he's no Austin Matthews, but if he contributes really well in his age 19 season, I think that could really push this team a lot more. I agree with you that it's not necessarily make or break, but I think there's much more of a chance for him to make a big impact than to really break.
Okay.
Because
sure.
At worst, he's fourth line. He gets his 12 minutes. He does fine. He kind of does what we've seen for the last few games. But on the plus side, if he can develop in season and kind of continue to make adjustments, he's really shown an ability to not so much be a game breaker, but really contribute and really help things out and push this team forward. Because this team has not had a real home drafted, home developed real breakout year, certainly in the last few years that I can remember. That's why I'm kind of maybe cautiously optimistic.
Sure.
And to that point, I'm thinking the last drafted player we had that really had a breakout year was Brent Burns. So,
oh man,
yeah. So looking ahead to next week, Wild have a regular slate of games. They got 3 games this week, 3-game homestand actually. They have Calgary on Tuesday, Boston on Thursday, and then Colorado on Saturday night.
Three winnable games.
What are we looking forward to this week?
I mean, you got to circle the Colorado matchup on that schedule there. So that's the first one I'm looking at. Is those are always fun. We're always wringing our hands, always licking our chops to get a matchup against Colorado, especially at home.
Yeah, it's always a good day when you get matched up against the Avalanche.
And I think the last time they played the Bruins, they beat them up pretty good. I want to say that was a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that was the infamous Malcolm Subban game.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so like you said, 3 winnable games. I mean, you got to look for. You really kind of have to hope for at least 4 points this week, one way or another. So I don't know. I think that's entirely possible. I think this team is, as we've seen glimpses of it playing better. I mean, certainly the Pittsburgh game and today's game, you have to feel pretty decent about the team, even aside from whatever the goaltending brings. So it's not just let's hope Dubnyk steals one kind of situation anymore. So yeah, you got to hope for this team to continue that turnaround, that they're outshooting teams and outscoring teams legitimately now. And you hope that you beat up on teams that you're supposed to beat up on. I mean, I know Boston is kind of a playoff contender, and Colorado always kind of thinks they're a playoff contender, but you have to beat these teams. You have to win those games because it's certainly not going to get much easier than this week.
Yeah, that's the main thing that I'm looking for, even this year compared to certainly the last couple of years, and especially back in your 2010, 2011, when they were still, not as well put together as they are now. This team still sometimes plays down to the competition too much. I want to see them really play from a position of strength and play as a better team, against your Calgarys, against your Colorados. They're still playing down a little bit too much and keeping these teams around. The recent Buffalo game is kind of a good example. They're going to have these matchups against some of these teams at the bottom of the standings, and they just have to kind of assert their dominance a little bit more than they have been. So that's one thing I'm going to be watching for. I'm also still trying to be more sort of process-oriented instead of outcome-oriented at this time in the season. I'm going to be watching for some the line combos and see what Boudreau's doing with the lines. Sort of this high-event stuff, maybe even if it's not. So I thought that this team could be much more possession-dominant than they are. They're kind of middling, maybe at best right now in terms of possession. But if they're playing games like they were tonight, where they're getting 40 shots on goal, but they're giving up 36 or 38, I think I'm okay with that. Obviously, it depends on how Dubnyk does, but that's kind of how the team is built. And so, love to see them get as many points as they can, but I'm also just going to kind of watch how they're playing and how their approach is, and special teams too, especially. The power play this year has been better, although that's not saying much. I mean, they were at the bottom of the standings, so now they're kind of middle of the pack. I'm not quite as concerned about their power play this year as I was in recent years. Have you guys looked too much into their power play so far?
I haven't a whole lot. I mean, just from stats wise, I haven't a whole lot. Just from watching, it seems like there's been, a little improvement, but as you said, that wasn't necessarily a very high bar to clear on improvement. So,
yeah, I think it's been, to the naked eye, it's been better. I haven't looked at a whole lot of stats. I haven't done an article on the power play yet either, but it's been better, and certainly I think the deployment maybe has been a little bit better. We haven't seen the same old Parisi, Grandlin, Koivu, Suter, Pominville. Like, we haven't seen that.
Thank God.
Yeah, because, I mean, Lord knows we saw that fivesome almost every single power play under Mike Yeo, and that was definitely a very fair criticism of Mike Yeo. And Boudreau has thrown everything against the wall to see what has stuck. And right now he's just kind of throwing forward lines out there. And fortunately enough, I mean, right now our lineup is so condensed because of injury. That's just kind of how it is. But less to complain about. So, you have to be happy with that end of it. You have to be happy with, the results, like you said, have been kind of mixed, but you have to be happy that, there's guys like Coyle, guys like Nino, guys like Dumba, guys like Riley even, who are getting power play time.
Yeah, and to certainly for the power play, but overall, I'm kind of in this weird spot in terms of evaluating this team too, because even Boudreau has said that he thought it was going to take until about Christmas time for the guys to really get the system. The personnel, the lineup is generally the same. Obviously, Stahl coming out of the first line is a huge change, but I think we're seeing a team that's even going to get better. Hopefully, I'm not too Pollyanna-ish here, but they're still figuring out the system, and they're still figuring out some of their new line combos and things. So, even though there may be some bumps in the road, I'm still overall happy with what they're doing so far. If we sort of expect or even assume a little bit that they're going to figure it out more and more as the system gets more ingrained, as they're able to practice it more. You look at the assistant coach turnover too. It's not just Boudreau. So yeah, that's why I'm trying to keep my eye more on the process stuff than the outcome this early in the season. So, there are things that need to be fixed up. There are players that need to step up, but it's hard to be too angry with the results that they've had so far this season.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially considering some other teams in the division have kind of just been, they haven't gotten off to the greatest of starts. It's good to see the Wild, doing all right, and with a new system and all that. And as they sit right now, they're third in the Central, so that's not a bad place to be.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose on to our final topic, our trademark topic for our jersey discussion.
All right, hitting the button.
Here to start the third period. What team is this? It's not Team USA. Well, yes, it is. They've got on new uniforms. They're wearing the logo of the Duck. I've never seen this before.
Shazam! We're back.
So this week's jersey team is Ottawa, and as Ben told me before the show, I sighed heavily. I'm not really sure what to do with Ottawa. So I guess for for Bob, who's kind of new to this, what we do is we we'll look at a team each week and we kind of think about how Adidas is going to come in and redesign them next season, or if they will at all. Some teams we've just kind of said, yeah, they're probably going to stand pat. Next week we looked at Colorado and I just kind of said, yeah, they'll probably make a few changes here and throw some 3 stripes down the side and whatnot. So I guess, Ben, I'll let you kind of go with this since I'm guessing you have more thoughts on this than I do.
Yeah, in the brief time I had to think about it, I've never been super enamored with any of Ottawa's jerseys. I think their original jerseys when they came back in '93, I think it was, really simple. The logo was maybe a little bit too much clip art kind of looking. And now, I'm not really crazy about the logo they're using now either. It's maybe a little bit too much on the other end of the spectrum, maybe a little bit too much cartoonish. So I don't know. I'd kind of like to see a full redesign for them. I mean, they're one of the few teams we've kind of advocated that for, but a logo change. I think the colors are fine. Obviously, the black and red and gold kind of work for them. But I don't know. I'd kind of like to see what they come up with. By the way of maybe finding some kind of middle ground between that kind of really boring helmet kind of combination that they had, and then now they've kind of got the sneering gladiator type look going on. I don't know. Maybe if they just went for like full on Marvin the Martian, that might be kind of cool.
Yes, second. I love it.
Yeah, I basically with this, I just basically assume every week that somehow Adidas is just going to incorporate 3 stripes down the side.
Well, we knew that, yeah.
Ottawa, as you said, definitely a team that they can kind of use a new jersey set, and because I don't really know what they got going on right now, and so I'll just say next year they'll probably come out with like a red and white. Say they do, redesign. They'll come out with like a red and a white, home and away, and then they'll just put 3 black stripes down the side. So,
think of all the Erik Karlsson jerseys they could sell.
Yeah, they need to sell more because apparently the Senators are, they're not overly profitable right now. So
I'd like to see him move off of the red, black, and white and bring the gold, maybe this gold and black. I'm kind of a fan of this alternate jersey that they got going on, or this alternate uniform right now. The big O on the front.
Yeah.
I kind of like it. I kind of, it's not the best, but I sort of like the aesthetic of it overall. And so I kind of like to see them go with this, maybe more black, or emphasize maybe the black and gold and red instead of this really red and white and black. I don't follow the Canadian teams as much maybe as I should, but I think it's a little too easy to get the Senators and the Flames mixed up in people's heads because they're both just red and white. Mm-hmm. So I'd kind of like to see them go with a little bit more with the black and gold, or maybe all 3 of this black, red, and gold that they got going on. And I kind of say I just sort of like the big O that they got there. So I wouldn't mind that.
Well, first thing I would say is, not paying attention to the Canadian teams. As we saw last year, you're not missing a whole lot up there, right?
Right.
And then,
this year,
I would, yeah.
This year, that's out the window.
Yeah, there's been some improvement up there, especially by Montreal, who surprisingly got really good again once the best goalie in the world came back to play for them. But no, I would wholeheartedly be on board with Ottawa embracing that kind of throwback looking jersey that they wear as their alternates. They probably won't do that because that would make too much sense.
Indeed.
So yeah, that can probably wrap it up. I think we got a good hour in.
Yeah, we're just a little over.
Thanks to Bob for joining us this week. Bob, where can people find you on the interwebs?
Sure. So people can follow me on Twitter at Boba Fenwick. They can follow our blog and our podcast at #hockey.com with the word #hockey spelled out. #hockey podcast you can find on iTunes right now. We're working to get that onto some other platforms, your Stitchers and things like that. The Twitter account for that is at HTHpod. And if you would indulge me for just a couple minutes, I have a new thing that I want to talk about, thing that I'm very excited about. It's this new business venture that I'm pursuing wholeheartedly. I've given up my educational research career, and I'm jumping into the entrepreneurial game. And I'm happy to come on your podcast and talk about it a little bit. I'm going to open up what's called a board game cafe in Minneapolis, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, and we have some kind of similar ideas in the Twin Cities, but not really nobody's really done what I'm going to be doing yet, at least I feel. Basically, you take a coffee shop and a bar and a game shop, and you roll them all together, and what you get is a board game cafe. Imagine a place where people will come. There'll be a huge collection of board games. We're talking like 500 and 600 titles eventually. I'm going to have to work up to that a little bit. But so you come, there's a small entry fee, just about $5 a head, to come get access to this huge collection of board games. We've also going to have gourmet coffee, craft beer, wine, and cider, great food. Just trying to, open up a place, just a very casual atmosphere. A lot of times people are hesitant to go to their local game shop because it's kind of seen as hyper-competitive. So one thing that I'm really going to strive toward is to just make a really relaxed, comfortable atmosphere that people can come and play games. I'm still kind of in the very early planning stages, but I'm working furiously to get this idea off the ground. I'm going to call it the Boardroom. And so if people are interested, certainly they can reach out to me at the accounts and things that I just mentioned. But I would love it if people could go and follow the Twitter account for my new business. It's at Boardroom BGC. BGC stands for Board Game Cafe. I'm soon to have a website. I'm working very hard to launch a Kickstarter in the next few weeks, maybe in the next month. So definitely going to hear from me about that. But if you could go to at Boardroom BGC and give that account a follow, I will be eternally grateful, because that'll really give me a kickstart onto my Kickstarter when that comes out. If people, just real quick, if people are familiar with Fantasy Flight games in Roseville, similar idea, except picture kind of a more cozy atmosphere instead of a big warehouse. Chatterbox Pub is another one. I've recently come back to town, so I've got to check that out, but a little bit less of a bar and more kind of a cafe feel. So yeah, I'm really diving into this head first. I'm really excited about it, and I hope other people are going to get excited about it as well.
I mean, you got craft beer, so you'll definitely get at least a couple visits out of me. But,
Nice.
So yeah, no, definitely check that out. Check out Bob's work and his new venture, and we would definitely love to have you back at some point. And then, of course, you can find me and Ben on the Twitters at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell, and the podcast at GATG Wild Podcast. And then you can find us writing at wildextra.com. Yeah, that'll wrap it up for this week. Thanks to Bob one last time for